The reason we look for these old roads is that nobody lived very far from the road. Until the middle of the 19th century, you stayed within a matter of a couple yards of the road, because that was your internet. That was your primary source of information. People driving by. If somebody ran by your house, it was probably a smart idea to catch up with them. But that was the way you learned about opportunities and risks, was by being close to the road. Whether you were a Native American or a European, that's where your information came from. In the 18th century, pre-modern times, when muscles powered transportation, roads didn't go from town to town. They went from river crossing to river crossing. And if there was a particularly difficult river crossing, or a river crossing that just happened to be one day's travel along a road, a town would arise. And the way you find them is by surmising the location of a ford. There's very limited physical characteristics in a riverbed that allow a ford to happen. You go to that ford point and then you climb up on the hills around that ford and walk the face of the hill until you fall into a roadbed, like this one. And that's how you find them. In this particular case, this is a re-engineered road. As I say, there's at least 3 versions of this road, and within 200 feet of where I'm standing. Here's the original Ford Road. Finding old stream crossings is always a challenge. This is the entrance to Hillsboro, and there are at least 3 or 4 different crossings at this point. There were 2 bridges downstream and a bridge right here. And what is left now is a sewer easement running up the old roadbed from when the bridge was here. Prior to bridging, the entrance to the town was a creek that runs right next to the roadbed over here. The creek is just south of it, and that was your ramp to get down into the river and get across. There was a natural grade on this side of the river that needed very little improvement to get into town, certainly on horseback, but wagon as well. This was probably as close as you came to a good ford in Hillsboro. It was not a very good ford, but it was close. This mound right here to our right is a bridge abutment. That was the base of one of the bridges that was built here. I'm standing atop the bridge pier that I talked about a moment ago, just to give an idea of the scale of the thing. There are some photographs of this bridge extant, showing a gentleman sitting on a bench near the bridge. Just upstream from us is the old Nashculloch Mill. I can't emphasize enough the reason that we look for these things. Intrinsically, old roads are pretty neat. They're romantic, they're exciting, they stimulate the imagination. But more importantly, the vast preponderance of the archaeology of the pre-modern moment, that is the age of muscle power, lies within a few feet of these old roads. The vast preponderance of the archaeology. If we know where the roads are, we know what to protect. And that's one of our goals, is to protect as much of this stuff as possible, because documents only tell part of the story. The real story of common people will be done archaeologically. It's in the ground. And protecting the stuff, the information that's in the ground, is our primary motive. Finding this sort of artifact, a mound, a dirt anomaly, is what we live for. The reason we look for the old roads is to find old things. And this is an old thing right here. This is alongside of a major road coming out of Hillsboro going towards Salisbury, and it is on a piece of land that was once owned by Thomas Hart Benton's parents. So we can speculate and perhaps surmise that Thomas Hart Benton played amongst these trees that are around us here. And although there's no way of identifying this house to the family for sure, it's in the right place. It's alongside the Salisbury, Great Road to Salisbury, It's alongside the Great Road to the High Rock Ford. It's right at the opening, right over here, immediately over here, about a quarter of a mile is the opening of Occoneechee Gap. All the roads are necking into that gap. This house was in a great location for that. This ancient structure sat at a crossroads. We found it because we were following the old roads, and the old roads are all congregating on the west end of what we call Occoneechee Gap. The chimney here is probably reworked. It's probably not original, but the site is. The trees here are much older than the masonry in that chimney. The families that lived here over the years, let's assume it was 200 years old. Most families wouldn't have spent 50 years in the house. There's at least four families that have occupied this site. It was occupied into the 20th century, but it certainly is an 18th century site because the 18th century roadbed is right next to it. Hasn't been used in over 100 years. Here's what's left of the folks that lived here. Must be a child's grave. It isn't 4 feet long. It's depressed, so there was once a coffin in there. And all that's left is a headstone and a footstone. These are commonplace alongside the old roads. Not necessarily children's graves, but the headstone, footstone, without any inscription, is as common as anything you will find. And it's evocative. It makes you wonder, who were the parents? What happened to the child? Was it a disease? Did something fall on them? Did they fall into a quarry pit? This is one of the reasons we do this, is to connect with the people, the real people. A document will give you a name, but a grave gives you a person. Stewardship is very important. Property owners that have these things really have a responsibility to take care of our common past. And there's very little incentive to preserve them except that they were once us. This is the way we were 200 years ago, 100 years ago. And it's good to be reminded.